Hey guys, let's talk about the murder of Mary Phagan. This is a shocking child murder that divided the nation in 1913. Mary Phagan was born on June 1st, 1899, to a farming family in Florence, Alabama. Her mother was Frances Phagan. Mary's father passed away from the measles before she was born. The family found themselves in dire straits and moved to Bellwood, a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. Frances ran a boarding house to make ends meet. When Mary was 10 years old, she dropped out of school and found factory work. On April 26, 1913, Mary had two things on her mind. First, it was Confederate Memorial Day in Georgia, and she was excited to show off her new dress and watch the parade. Secondly, she had to go to the National Pencil Company and pick up her final paycheck of $1.20 from her boss, Leo Frank. The company laid her off after a shipment of sheet metal failed to arrive. Mary had a late breakfast of cabbage and bread at 11:30 a.m., then said goodbye to her mother for the last time. On April 27th at 3:20 a.m., night watchman Newt Lee went to the basement of the National Pencil Company to clean what they called back then the colored bathrooms. This was for black people because they weren't allowed to use the white bathrooms. On the floor amongst the filth of the rarely used basement, Newt discovered the dead body of little Mary Phagan. 13-year-old Mary lay there face down. The dress she meant to wear to the festivities was pulled up, exposing her torn and bloody underclothes. Soot and ash from a nearby furnace covered her face, obscuring the child's skin color. Newt was terrified that he, a black man in 1913 Georgia, found the body of a murdered white child. Atlanta was still recovering from the 1906 race riots, and race relations were still volatile. Despite what might happen, he immediately told the police. It was an eerily quiet day at the police headquarters for a Saturday. But that stillness was shattered with a telephone call at 3:30 a.m. Officer Anderson dropped the receiver without bothering to ask who was calling. He only recalled the words, quote, "Somebody's killed up here. It's the pencil factory on Forsyth Street," unquote. Officer Anderson jumped in his car and drove to the pencil factory with officers Dobbs and Brown. Newt led the policemen, pistols drawn, to the small recess in the impossibly dark basement where the body was located. The body was stiff and cold, indicating the girl had been killed hours prior. A terrible gash on her head and a length of twine embedded in the skin around her neck suggested murder. Police located two cryptic notes near Mary's body, allegedly written by the girl during the attack. Sergeant Dobbs shook his head. Quote, "And this," he said, "in a civilized country," unquote. The police arrested Newt before they learned the deceased girl's name. Officer Rogers happened to have a relative, a young girl named Grace Hicks, who worked at the factory, so he picked her up, hoping she would identify the body. Quote, "My God," she said when she saw the body, "that's Mary Phagan. Who killed her?" Unquote. The two girls were friends who often worked side by side. Investigators noticed drag marks leading from the elevator to Mary's body. They followed the tracks which led to a metal workshop. Near a lathe machine, where Mary often worked, they found the envelope that should have contained her pay. Police also discovered strands of hair that looked like Mary's, along with drops of blood splattered on the floor. The office of her boss, 29-year-old Leo Max Frank, was just 200 feet away. By all accounts, Frank had a good Jewish upbringing. He graduated from Pratt Institute in 1902 and majored in engineering at Cornell University, where he graduated in 1906. Leo interned in Germany. He settled in Atlanta upon his return, where his uncle secured a supervisory position for him at the National Pencil Company. Leo married Lucille Selig, whose family established the first synagogue in Atlanta. The couple shared a home with Lucille's parents on East Georgia Avenue. Leo was the elected president of the Atlanta chapter of B'nai B'rith and was known as an upstanding member of the growing Jewish community in Atlanta. Detectives realized the last person to see Mary alive was her boss. That Sunday morning, police telephoned Leo and informed him, quote, "There has been a tragedy," unquote. they asked him to accompany detectives to the morgue to view and identify the body. Leo was high-strung. Leo asked the detectives if something happened at the factory. They didn't respond. Leo asked, quote, "Did the night watchman call up and report anything to you?" Unquote. Detective Black responded, quote, "Mr. Frank, you'd better get your clothes on and let us go to the factory and see what happened." Unquote. Leo tried to delay the trip, asking if he could first have coffee, but found himself in a squad car on his way to the morgue and then to the crime scene. Detective Boots Rogers graphically described how Newt discovered a body. Quote, "Did she work at the factory?" Leo asked nervously. "I don't know many of the girls, but I can look on my payroll and see." Unquote. This statement incriminated Leo, since investigators knew Mary picked up her check from the man the previous day. At the morgue, Leo glanced at the body casually. He reiterated he wasn't sure he knew the girl. He thought he might have paid her Saturday. Leo gave his statement. He was at the factory to do a little clerical work. Around noon, a little girl came into the office and collected her pay. He claimed he didn't know the girl's name, but she asked him if the sheet metal was delivered. Leo told her no. When Leo completed his work, he planned to go to a baseball game with his brother-in-law, a plan that Leo canceled at the last minute. Leo left the building at 1:20 p.m. for lunch, returned at 3 p.m., and was home for dinner. Police were suspicious but needed more evidence than a nervous demeanor to arrest Leo. They released Newt for the same reason. They weren't expecting Newt would give them enough info to detain Leo. According to Newt, Leo called him around 6:30 p.m. to ask if everything was all right at the factory. Leo wasn't in the habit of checking in. Police wondered if Leo called to see if anybody discovered Mary's body. That variance from the routine was enough to arrest Leo on May 8, 1913. 10 days later, an anonymous worker called in a tip. Factory worker Jim Conley was there that day too, and he may have been washing blood off his shirt. Leo claimed he didn't realize Conley was present that day and had no business there. Police immediately brought him in for questioning. Investigators took handwriting samples from Newt and Leo, neither of which appeared to match the murder letters. Jim claimed he was completely illiterate. He feigned illiteracy for 18 days before investigators confronted him with the letters he wrote during his stay. The writing samples matched perfectly to the murder notes. There was no denying it, so Jim admitted he wrote them. Of course, he had an excuse. Under oath, Jim offered a story. Leo gave Mary her pay envelope. She asked him if the metal shipment arrived. Instead of saying no, he said, "I don't know," and invited Mary into the metal room to check. In the metal room, Mary resisted Leo's advances. Leo subdued and awed Mary so violently she hit her head hard enough to knock her out. Panicked, Leo strangled Mary to death to prevent her from telling anyone. Afterward, Leo allegedly told Jim, quote, "I wanted to be with the little girl, and she refused me. I struck her, and I guess I struck her too hard. She fell and hit her head against something, and I do not know how bad she got hurt. Of course, you know I ain't built like other men." Unquote. Leo was a slight man at 5'7" and about 145 pounds, not much larger than Mary. Jim was in a better position to carry and conceal Mary's body than Leo was, so he allegedly offered Jim $200 to do exactly that. A grand jury indicted Leo for Mary's murder on May 23rd. He remained in custody at Fulton County Jail. Jury selection began on July 24th, 1913. 12 men, 4 of them Jewish, heard the case in Judge Leonard Roan's court. Many women came forward to say Leo made inappropriate advances towards them at work. Montine Stover claimed she also went to collect her pay that day but found Leo's office empty. She stayed from around noon to 12:15, precisely the time frame the coroner gave for Mary's murder. On July 28th, the prosecution presented its case. On the witness stand, Jim told the same story he told the police. He admitted he wrote the notes and said Frank dictated them. The letters implicated a lanky black man with dark skin, a man unlike Jim who was black but light-skinned and stout. They intended to describe Newt, an innocent man. A crowd gathered outside the courthouse and shouted, quote, "Hang the Jew," unquote. The trial concluded on August 25th. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and reached a unanimous verdict. Leo was guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Roan sentenced Leo Frank to die by hanging on October 10th, 1913. Leo's lawyers appealed the sentence at every level. Each appeal was denied. With each motion, his execution date got pushed back a little farther. However, on June 20th, 1915, Governor John M. Slatton commuted Leo's sentence to life in prison. Leo transferred from Fulton County Jail to Milledgeville State Prison Farm. The people of Atlanta became divided once again, with some believing in Frank's innocence. Others thought he was guilty and deserved to die for his crimes. Papers across the country printed both viewpoints with such venom that, guilty or innocent, Frank was unsafe. On July 18th, an inmate slashed Leo's throat. He barely survived the attack. As he recuperated, a group of Atlanta citizens band together, calling themselves the Knights of Mary Phagan. On August 16th, the mob stormed the Milledgeville prison. The vigilantes cut the prison phone lines, drained gasoline from the police vehicles, and kidnapped Leo from his cell. The unidentifiable Knights drove Leo 72 miles, hand and feet bound, to the Cobb family farm outside of Marietta, Georgia, Cobb being a former sheriff. Leo asked his kidnappers to send a letter to his wife. They took the message and destroyed it because Leo wrote it in German. They couldn't have Leo identifying them in any language, considering what they were about to do. Leo was stoic as the vigilantes threw the rope over a branch of an old oak tree and looped it around his neck. He continually proclaimed his innocence. They made sure Leo faced the general direction of Mary's home and hanged him. Jim Conley served 1 year on a chain gang as an accessory to Mary's murder. Atlanta would not have a race riot that year. Alonzo Mann, Leo's office boy, was 13 years old when Mary Phagan died. During the trial, Alonzo testified that he went to the pencil factory that day too. In 1982, Alonzo was dying and wished to unburden himself. According to Alonzo, he witnessed Conley carrying the body of Mary Phagan. Conley noticed him and threatened his life. Alonzo asked his parents, who advised him to keep it to himself, which he did for 69 years. Based on Alonzo's sworn statement, Leo received a posthumous pardon in 1986. Leo did not receive exoneration, though, since the new account only proved the guilt of Conley, not the innocence of Leo. Researching the murder of Mary Phagan is a laborious process of digging up buried facts and never arriving at her truth. One must wade through 100-year-old newspaper articles and court documents full of vitriol and racial and anti-Semitic slurs. Newer materials are authored mostly by hate groups, each with an agenda that has little to do with identifying Mary's killer. If you believe Leo did it, you have to side with neo-Nazis and their propaganda. If you think Jim did it, you become aligned with good old boys who believe America was great when Mary was arred and murdered. Two things occurred in response to the lynching of Leo Frank, a lynching that destroyed any possibility of justice in this case. First, the information of the Anti-Defamation League, an organization dedicated to Jewish identity and anti-hate. The other was the second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, an organization grounded in hate and fear. Unfortunately, I don't believe that being 109 years later, we'll ever know who really murdered Mary Phagan. Was it Leo Frank? Was it Jim Conley? We'll probably never know. But I do hope that wherever she is, little Mary Phagan is resting in peace.